What I was first thinking was, if my marriage is going to end, it should be over something way more dramatic, like an affair with an NFL player. Hi everyone, my name is Rodsky. I wrote a book called Fair Play. It outlines how to divide up tasks fairly based on the needs of your household. I grew up in a single mom household with a younger brother. We had a lot of challenges early on. My mom, Terry, she is my hero. She was pregnant with her second child when my father left, and she had to restart her life with 2 young kids in a new city. After I grew up in a single parent home, I vowed that I would have an equal partner in life. And I did. I married that equal partner. We were killing it in business and in life. Cut to 2 kids later, and I find myself sobbing on the side of the road from a text my husband sent me. I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries. And I was sitting there sobbing. I was thinking, if my marriage is gonna end, it should be over something way more dramatic, like an affair with an NFL player. Why was I the default for literally every single childcare and household task? Why was the shit on me? These are the tasks that are completely invisible, yet they have to get done. Things like scheduling doctor's appointments, managing the family calendar, prepping school lunches, taking kids for haircuts, arranging play dates, arranging for babysitters if you want to go out for dinner. And the list just goes on and on and on. Sobbing on the side of the road was the last straw. I knew something had to change. So I embarked on a quest to find a solution for domestic rebalance that I knew so many of us needed. My quest started with the Should I Do spreadsheet. It had 100 tabs with about 15 to 20 sub-tabs, so it was over 1,000 items, and it was crowdsourced from women all across the country. I was so excited to share the spreadsheet with Seth. So I send it. I just got that one monkey whose eyes are covered. That was it. In that moment, I realized that lists alone don't work, but systems do. I have done extensive research into what is called the gender division of labor. For 100 years, we've been talking about the unfair division of labor in the home. It's time for a 21st century solution that works. Imagine a world where you have time to discover who you are beyond being a parent, a worker, a partner. That's what Fair Play is for. Blueberry guy is still my soulmate. We are still together, and every single day we live Fair Play, and every single day our marriage gets even stronger. I love you, Seth. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to Hello Sunshine for more videos like this.
Thank you so much. Welcome. This is truly, literally, a labor of love in both the figurative and literal sense. So thank you so much for putting this incredible and most important conversation on the table. You know, I would love to just share a little bit with the room. Like, there's one concept that really is woven into the entire book about this notion of equality versus equity, and obviously it's in the title in terms of fair play, not even. Can you share a little bit of your thoughts on that and what you've uncovered?
Yes, I've uncovered, and the most important thing I like to talk about is that 50-50 is the wrong equation. And what I mean by that is I think that that's held us back because that's about scorekeeping. And we've been making lists for decades, and lists alone don't work. But just like in the workplace, systems do. And I started thinking about that. And I'll just say one thing about the fair play system, which can set us up for a conversation. Everything you need to know about fair play can be boiled down into one word, and that word is mustard. And what I mean by that is somebody has to notice, you know, I noticed that my son Johnny likes French's yellow mustard with his hot dog. And he doesn't eat his protein unless he has that yellow mustard. Okay, that's what I call conception. Then someone has to write down on a list that French's yellow mustard is low or that you need that. And it goes along, you know, with the rest of the groceries for your week. That's what I call planning. Next, someone has to get their butt to the store to purchase the mustard. That's execution. And that's usually when men step in, and that's a problem. Because inevitably, the man brings home spicy Dijon. It's just what happens. It's not French is yellow, it's spicy Dijon. And then he's telling me I can't do anything right. I went all the way to the store for her, and I didn't even do it right. And then women are telling me all over across the country that I can't even trust my husband to purchase the right type of mustard, and you're telling me you want me to trust him with our living will? Like, not gonna happen. And then we end up in a trust cycle that spirals. It doesn't happen like that in our home. Other companies, right? I mean, I don't know how you do things here, but Apple coined the term directly responsible individual. Netflix has a similar term, rare responsible person. It's all over the place. This idea that when you own something, you own it from conception to planning to overseeing the execution. And that is how we treat our organizations at work. And what I'm trying to argue is that it's time to treat our home as our most important organization.
It is. It's like running a small business.
Yes.
My husband often says that he's running a very unsuccessful restaurant where
Yes.
just so much of our food is going to waste.
Yes.
But it is a really
trying.
important message. Right. Yeah. And it's you mention in the book, too, that it's found that men actually do about 5 hours less of housework after kids than they do pre-kids on a per week basis. Is this book and this guide mostly geared toward men or hetero couples or couples with children? Like, where's the target? Who do you think this can help?
Well, what's been pretty amazing is that just yesterday I got an email from my assistant who's getting emails on Fair Play Life and on info at Eve Rodsky, and there's been hundreds of emails, a really amazing response, and she said to me that 69% or about 70% of the emails have been from men. So what's been really exciting is to see the male response. And I think one man said to me, he said, well, if you don't believe in systems, then obviously you've never played sports or watched a sporting event. And so I even have like a quote coming in from, I think from Steve Kerr about the importance of systems. And so what's been so nice is that this is for everybody. I wrote Fair Play as a love letter to women. I dedicated to my mother Terry, my single mother who held all the cards, which is the Fair Play metaphor. But what I didn't realize as I was writing Fair Play was that it was going to become a love letter to men. Mm-hmm. And to the men who bring home spicy mustard and who feel like they're not getting anything right. Mm-hmm. And then what happens is, so one amazing man I interviewed was Busy Phillips' husband, Mark Silverstein, and he never speaks on the record. And I got him to speak on the record. And it was in a story about how she almost divorced him because he started doing 5 hours a week less, and then 10 hours a week less, and then 15 hours a week less after their kids were born. And so I said to Mark, what was happening? Because Busy felt like everything was so fair when you guys, first met before kids. You were really supportive of her career. You guys took turns doing the dishes, doing the laundry. And Mark said an interesting thing. He said, I don't like not being good at things. And I felt like I wasn't good at stuff in the home. And so I retreated and I stopped trying to help. And so again, I think Fair Play is really very opposite of the messaging and the solutions that are coming out today. What you'll see on the shelves next to Fair Play are things like why men will never do more in the home. You'll see a Guardian article that just came out saying the only solution is to strike and literally walk out. The New York Times had my favorite article where a woman wrote, the way to solve the gender division of labor is for you to move to a foreign country where only your husband knows the language, because then he's forced to fill out school forms. I really wish I could live on the beaches of Ibiza, and that would be amazing because Seth is an awesome Spanish speaker, but I don't think that's very...
It's not the most practical.
Practical, no.
Sounds fun, though.
Yeah, sounds really fun.
Can we let's take a step back and describe a little bit. You alluded before to the cards, and I have to say, when I was reading all the cards, so just caveat here, I listened to the audiobook and read. I did back and forth, and the audiobook, it's like the best vent session you've ever had, because you just feel like I was on a plane. I had my wine going. I'm like, I'm laughing out loud. I think it's really validating for both parties. But can you talk about what fair play is? Just kind of set the stage for the gamification of it.
Yes, so fair play is based on that mustard situation. It's based on the fact that when you own a card, you're owning the full card from conception to planning to execution. So it's really based on, it's not rocket science because you all do it in your daily lives, right? But what it's based on is this idea that when Seth, and I'll say, just back up for a second, what we're dealing with, the gender division of labor, is also called the second shift. It's called emotional labor. It's called invisible work. And I like that term, invisible work, because it gave me this beacon of a solution. Maybe if I made visible, as you saw through my should I do spreadsheet attempt, which didn't work because of the monkey emoji, but what if I made everything visible that was invisible? Maybe there was a solution there. And so that didn't work alone. But when we start to systemize fair play and work on it, and really sit down to talk, as as I always say in my mediation practice, when emotion is high, cognition is low. And most of the time we're divvying up household responsibilities when emotion is high. But when you sit down for your staff meeting or your check-in, when things are calm, and I was able to say to Seth, I appreciate you wanting to play this with me. I appreciate that we both value extracurricular sports for our two sons, because it's great for their brain development. It keeps them off screens. You love sports. It got you a scholarship to college. We both value this card. But what's been happening is you've been telling everybody you're in charge of extracurricular sports because you show up at the field for their Little League games. Well, here's what's been happening in the conception and planning phases of this task card. I've been surveying their friends to see which sports they should play and asking them. That's conception. And then figuring out where to register them, what portal I could figure out. The password never worked. Xerox their birth certificate, because apparently they need birth certificates these days to play, just regular neighborhood sports. Peel snack on snack day. Somehow I ended up even being in charge of the coach's gift, so I'm getting Venmos from all these random people for a coach's gift. I have no idea what to get. I think I ended up just getting like a bottle of wine, which was completely inappropriate. Yeah, tequila, alcohol in front of the kids. Like, here's your bottle of wine. And he said to me, I had no idea that these things were even happening. And so when I said, now we're starting with one card, there are 100, but let's just focus on one. We'll start with extracurricular sports. And when I ask you to hold this card, you're going to hold it. And he's like, well, that's a lot of work. He's like, how are the kids going to get to practice? I said, well, I'm not really sure, because you're now the directly responsible individual for that question. You can figure out your own execution or oversee it. And then things started to change, because he then had empathy for all the things that went into just getting them to the field. So what I like to say, back to 50-50 is the wrong equation. It's never going to be 50-50. But here's the thing, it doesn't matter, because it really is not about scorekeeping. It's about ownership and perceived fairness. And the science backs me up. What's most important to people in a relationship from the science shows that it's perceived fairness, that both people feel that things are fair.
That's a really important point. You also talk a lot about kind of the time messages that both parties are receiving and how that can play into, what you're saying in terms of the value of time. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yes, it's very interesting. I got to say this on Good Morning America today, which felt very empowering. In my research I interviewed 500 men and women from all walks of life for this project, for this book, that mirrored the US Census in terms of ethnicity, socioeconomic status. And what I found over the course of those interviews was that men, women, and society view men's time as finite, like diamonds, and women's time is infinite, like sand. And my favorite way to get at that finding was to interview men and women with the same job. 2 shipping supervisors, 2 pediatricians, 2 colorectal surgeons. And I would ask the man, in the relationship, these were the cisgender ones. I'll talk about my same-sex relationships and, sort of hetero couples. This is cisgender hetero. But I'd ask the man, what's going on here? Why is your wife still packing lunches? Why is she the one who gets the call from the school nurse's office saying your kid's sick?
Great time.
Inevitably, the man would give me some sort of answer across the country of, well, I really don't have time. Like I'm super busy, so I'm not really paying attention, right? I don't have time. So I pulled that out. Then I would ask the women all over the country, same job. Why is she doing all these things, like packing the lunches, receiving the phone calls, going to pick up her kids when they're sick in the middle of the day? And they inevitably said, I find time. So people, what I like to say is like, unless we're Albert Einstein and somehow we can like fuck with the space-time continuum, there's no way to find time. There's just less choice over how we use our time. And the worst perpetrators of all were women. We're women. The number one answer that women gave me for why they do it all was because I'm a better multitasker, because I'm wired differently. So the beauty of my work as a philanthropic advisor, which is my day job and mediator, is that my clients fund the top researchers in the world. So I called them all up, all the neuroscientists, and I said, please tell me, there's so many weird articles in the New York Post or the Times. What's the truth about women and multitasking? So on the record, I got all these very formal answers that say there's no difference, even when you look for it, in men and women's executive function or their ability to multitask. But off the record, and he said I could use this on the road, one neuroscientist said to me, not in the book, but on the road, he said, imagine you could convince half the population that they were better at wiping asses and doing dishes. How great for the other half of the population. And by the way, I saw that last week because the Forbes list came out and there were 100 CEOs on that list. And 99 of them had one thing in common. They were men.
Don't even get me started.
Yeah.
No, there is a lot of truth to that because I've heard that before, that women are better multitaskers and men are better single taskers, and that's why, when I would come home and unload everything from underneath the stroller and put away the groceries and do all this stuff, and he could just crack open Rolling Stone and sit on the couch, well, he was wired that way. It was really enlightening to hear that that's not the case, but also that forgiveness for ourselves, I think, and kind of getting both parties into that conversation and that.
Yeah, I mean, these are toxic time messages that society has given us since we were born, right? And so we can spend 100 years wallowing in sort of what brought us to this place, or we could actually find a solution. And I realized that when I talked to Seth, my husband, about time fairness, that I wanted him to value my time as equal to his, because we only both have 24 hours in a day. And that time isn't money. And just because I chose a profession in philanthropy and he chose a profession in private equity, that his time is not power hours and more valuable than mine, because we both have 24 hours in a day. Things started to change. Because ultimately, he didn't want me to feel sad and that he didn't value me or my time. And so that's why I ask people to break those messages down, because I wish we could just go to the playing. I wish this could have just been a card game, but this became a really big book that they made me keep cutting because I had so much material over 7 years of research that the first 4 rules, we have to wake people up. Not just men, but women as well.
Yeah. You were mentioning before that, the differences that you see based on the societal messages that we get for cisgendered men and women and how that can play out in either different sex or same-sex relationships. What were some of the things that you uncovered, some of the differences you saw in different household setups?
Interesting. I think my same-sex findings were most interesting because this time is money, this toxic time messaging was very prevalent in my the gay male same-sex couples. The partner, what I was finding in my subset was that the partner who made less money was doing more in the home. So that was interesting. So good news for same-sex male couples, fair play works just the same because it's the same gender patterns as, again, the hetero couples. The same-sex women couples were also not doing the full CPE, but they were doing a different type of inefficiency. So the one I told you about was mustard with the woman, and you execute mustard, spicy Dijon with the man. I call that the breakup. An interesting one with a lot of the same-sex women couples are what I call the double up. And what was happening with them was I call this a case of the mystery powders. And the mystery powders was a form that a school sent home to Maria and Paula. And it said, your child has an egg allergy. Can they experiment with these mystery powders at school? So Maria hands in her form right away, and she checks off 6 of the 7 powders. Her child can touch the first 6, but not the 7th. Paola sends in her form that her child can touch all 7 powders. So what happens is the school calls them both and says, okay, your child cannot participate in this science day unless you get a certified note from your pediatrician that now tells us your child's able to participate in mystery powder day, and you have to hand deliver it to the school.
So inefficient.
Double up, completely inefficient.
Yeah. So I get this with my husband, who is a full-time dad, where I'll go home on the weekends and I'll just start wiping down the bathrooms. And he's like, I did it. But he'll just let me go. Because he's like, I feel like you have to get it out of your system. I'm like, no, I don't. Like, I would have loved to know that you already did this. Which I guess is the sign of a clean house if you can't.
Yeah, exactly.
But
maybe the double up's not so bad there, but when it's like mystery powders, it's pretty bad.
Yeah. You have a lot of different terms in the book that I think are really impactful and really kind of eye-opening. So one that I would love to discuss is this minimum standard of care and how that was born out of your legal training and understanding, what reasonable actions are. Can you expand on that?
Yes, I'll definitely talk about the minimum standard of care. I'll say this is actually very resonant with people who are not partnered yet, so some of the younger women I speak to and men, because this is a really important part of when you start coupling. Set your standards, have these conversations early. Because what standards are really about is your value system. And this is what I realized and uncovered. People would be arguing all the time over standards. My husband won't clean this, I'm not lowering my standards. And all these articles say, women just have to lower their standards. But I like to say, I don't really want a knife in my car seat, so I'm not really gonna lower my standard. And that's a true story. I had friends send me a video of her paring knife in her car seat from a knife her husband, who's a chef, just threw back into the back. So there's just too many messages out there that are women shaming, like lower your standards. So what works? What actually works for the $1 trillion tort system in our country? Because maybe we can learn something from that. Because obviously it's adjudicating hundreds and thousands and millions of cases a year. And that is the reasonable person standard. What's reasonable? And I'll tell you how that played out in my home. Seth and I, when we first started playing Fair Play, I was being very triggered by garbage. This is how I knew this was a crucial step. So he had taken the garbage card, but I was sort of hovering over him at all times. I was bringing a liner with me, just saying, like, are you gonna put the liner back in the bag when you go take it out? When are you gonna take it out? And he's like, chill out. This is just not gonna work if you're just gonna stalk me and follow me around the house asking me about garbage like all day long. So we took a step back and I said, okay, let's add this new step in for my mediation practice about values. So when we were calm, I said to my husband, okay, I think I'm triggered by garbage because I grew up in a single mother household in Stuyvesant Town where my mother didn't even have a garbage can. She just didn't think about getting a garbage can. So we would just have like a Chinese takeout bag or something from the local store where we would just throw garbage in. And it would spill out on the floor. And anytime I had to get water in the middle of the night, I'd turn on the light and all these cockroaches would scatter. And it was triggering me from my childhood. So I tell Seth all this context about garbage. And he says to me, well, I lived in a fraternity for 4 years and I lived next to 30 Domino's pizza boxes. So I don't really value garbage the same way you do. So where do you end up there? Mm-hmm. So then we said, okay, we have very different values about garbage. But what if we came up with a reasonable standard? And so I said, Seth, what do you think is reasonable for garbage if you want to hold this card? And he said, well, once a day. I'll take it out once a day. 7 p.m., 7:30 when I get home, and I'll put it in my calendar as a real appointment, as long as you never mention the word garbage again. And then guess what happened? Garbage goes out in my house at 7 p.m. every night. So people are like, oh my God, I have to have a 30-minute conversation about garbage. Well, check your screen time because I'm sure you've been on Facebook or Instagram or whatever longer than that.
YouTube, maybe.
YouTube, yeah. Yeah, so it's time to spend some time investing in these conversations because a 20-minute conversation over garbage will save you a lifetime of headache in the future. So that's definitely my advice to, again, the non-partnered people out here. Mm-hmm. The faster you set up your standards, the better for your life as you partner.
Agreed. It's really interesting when I was reading the book, you have this moment where, like, you just have that muscle memory of how your household runs, and maybe some of us have been doing it for, decades together, and this is just how things work, but it's not really working for any of us. So how do we, get over that hump of like, okay, this is going to be some work and I've got to put the time in, but ultimately then we're not going to argue about garbage ever again. Like, that seems like a really great benefit for that, what sounds like could potentially even be a 10-minute conversation.
Yes.
And so it's kind of switching those gears. And, I worried when I was reading the book, how do I bring my husband or my partner to the table on this? Because I have a nightstand that is like stacked yay high with what my husband calls like all my self-help woo-woo books. I think you call it a manifesto to self-help. And so I'm reading this book, and I know he's just like, oh, it's another one of those. I kid you not, Friday night we went out for dinner. I started describing the CPE framework, and he literally leaned in and just totally engaged with, well, I consider you for execution because I don't like calling people. I don't like talking to them on the phone. I'll do the conception and the planning, but I want you to take that last month.
Don't do
well,
that.
I know that's wrong now because I read the rest of the book.
Yeah,
On Friday I had it.
Right.
But it's really, to me, that what was so clear was how much he wanted to be in this conversation with me, because it's our house, it's our home. We're showing our children how this can run, apparently very inefficiently with the bathrooms and the execution. But so what is some of the feedback you're getting in terms of how people are engaging their partners in this conversation?
Well, I'll say it's a really good point about how daunting it could feel to have these conversations. But if I like to say, this came from a friend who read an early advanced reader copy, that if you think there's a life-changing magic of organizing your junk drawer, well, I'll tell you there's real life-changing magic in long-term thinking. But we're not great long-term thinkers. Human beings are not great long-term thinkers. So all over the book, I engaged my friend and colleague, Dan Ariely, because he's my favorite behavioral economist, and he specializes in long-term thinking. That's what economists do. I was trained as an economist. We think about long-term thinking. Because when you're figuring it out in the moment, when emotion is high and cognition is low, Dan talks about, in one of his books called Predictably Irrational, about what happens when you make decisions during emotional cascades. It is very toxic to your life. Mm-hmm. It could mean that, fine, I'm not going with you guys to Florida. Mm-hmm. And then you miss your trip to Disney World. So when you can take a step back and say, we're systematizing this, and actually systems allow for fun because we're not emotionally cascading and making terrible long-term decisions. When we can sit down and check in, we may not be able to do all the cards at once or talk about everything, but let's just start with garbage. Mm-hmm. What if we just start this week talking about garbage? I'll tell you that I'll learn more about you as a mediator if I sit down with you and your partner and hear about how you handle garbage in your house than I will if somehow I get one of those self-help books and they want to tell me what your love language is. Because what it comes down to is that the values, our home, the core conversations we're having now, they affect the rest of our lives. And they're affecting men. That's the beauty of it. And I'd love to tell like a quick story, but it's just like a 2-minute story, but it was really powerful to me. This is when I was beta testing the system, and I had a friend, Julie from New Jersey, call me and say, I'm ready to beta test the system. I'm completely overwhelmed. It's Christmas time. I'm decorating the Christmas tree. I'm taking the kids to school. I'm packing their lunches still. My mom just got sick. So I said, well, this is a terrible time to introduce fair play into your life because emotion is obviously really high, but okay, we'll try. She said, I'm at my breaking point. I said, well, what's your breaking point? What's breaking you? She said, my second son, Brody's Secret Santa gift for second grade, because it's a craft project that has to be made from scratch. Mm. And so I said, okay, I get it. That's terrible. And why would a school torture you like that around the holidays?
Yes, thanks for that.
Yeah, and so she says, but typically, like we were saying, my patterns are I would give Ed, my husband, we're both workers, a list to go pick up the stuff I need to build this craft project with my son, Brody. But you're telling me not to do that. And I said, you're right. I'm telling you not to do that. I'm asking you to tell Ed to own the homework card for this one project for this 1 week. And she says to me, I would literally have no idea even how to do that. And so back to values. I said, okay, let's back up. Why do you value this project? Why is it important to you? Because it's obviously stressing you out. And she says, well, it's the signature second grade project. And they build it from scratch because we're supposed to be teaching that holidays are not about big gifts and spending all this money, but it's about a lack of materialism and that homemade gifts can be beautiful too. So I said, wow, that's pretty powerful. And then she says, and more importantly, there's a new girl in the class. She's bullied. She has no friends. My son's popular. He's athletic. And how nice would it be if this new girl to the class got this awesome gift from a kid who's been, very well received in the class like her son? So I said, well, those are very powerful reasons. Like, what if you just tell Ed those things? Start with just telling him that and see what happens. So I checked back in with them after the holidays, and Ed gets on the phone, and he excitedly tells me that he starts Googling Secret Santa projects for little girls, and they decide on a popsicle stick jewelry box. So that's conception, right? That's now is a conception. And then they start writing down on a list everything they need for the box. So it was they wanted colored popsicle sticks, glue. He told me glitter, and that this is a man, very traditional man, so he's very engaged in this project. He says that even Brody wanted a knob. He wanted a little knob so that the little girl didn't have to use two hands to take off her jewelry box, that she could just take off her box with one hand. It's like, thanks, Ed, for all the details. So they put all that on their planning list. That's the planning. And then he says, and then I took my son Brody to this awesome store. It's called Michael's.
It is a store. It really
What's
is.
really crazy about the store is that you can buy all these crafts there. You don't have to go to more than one store. I'm like, oh, God, wow, that sounds like a great, cool store. And they go to Michael's. They come home. They start building the project. They're having fun. Julie chimes in and tells me that she sees her husband and Brody on the floor making the project. And she's like, okay, my life changed. I said, well, that's a very dramatic statement. Like, why do you feel like your life changed in that moment? And she said, it was just one thing. I saw glitter on my husband's hands. And I said, well, why was that so meaningful to you? And she said, well, because I felt like he was in it with me. And she's like, and this glitter's a pain in the ass to get out. And every time I have glitter in my hair at work, I feel like they're gonna think I'm not committed to the workforce. So what happens if men have glitter on their hands and in their hair? What happens when those are the CEOs on the Fortune 500 list or the Forbes list that we just saw that are running all these companies? Do they have empathy for women's time? Because now they know the context and the conception and the planning. Do they pay us more because they realize women's time are equal to men's time? There's a lot of change that can start inside the home. And I really fundamentally believe it starts there and by having empathy for each other. So Ed, I said to him and Julie, like, I need to bring them on the road with me. Some point, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great story, and it's really powerful imagery, and particularly doing it with his son, too. I think that's a really important message. You also shared that 90% of working moms report taking better care of their families than themselves. And I think for the working moms in the room, can certainly relate to that. One piece, there's several things that you highlight in your book that I really appreciate. One is adult relationships and the importance to have those for both parties, just to really invest the time in the people in your village around you. But also this idea of unicorn space and kind of reclaiming your right to be interesting. Is that how you put it?
Yes, yes.
Can you share more about that?
Yes, I'll start with the happiness trio because I have a Harper's, that's part Unicorn Space is one of those cards. I have a Harper's Bazaar article coming out this week called The Real Midlife Crisis, when the person who's supposed to love you the most resents you the most. And what it came from was a lot of my research where I would ask people, what would you do? And I'll ask you guys, just a picture in your head. If you were given a free hour today for yourself, what would you do with it? So just think for yourself for a second. So what I was finding was, it was breaking down to three things. One was actual self-care, not like CBD oil pedicures, like I don't know what that is, but real self-care, like take a walk on the beach with my dog, read my favorite book by a fire, self-care. The other responses were, I would finally see my best friend for a drink, I'd watch the Steelers game with a friend. It was adult friendships. And the third thing is what I call unicorn space, this idea to be, it's really called eudaimonic well-being, but unicorn space is just a cooler name, because like I say, it's really about like the mythical equine. It doesn't freaking exist unless you reclaim it in your life for men and women. And it's this idea of what made you uniquely you before you were a worker and a parent. And how do you share that with the world? For me, it's the gender division of labor. Other people, it was more interesting things like woodworking and baking and, lots of beautiful things. The fire mom who loves firefighting, and so she's now the head fire mom. Really cool stuff out there. But what was happening is I was getting all these responses about what made people happiest, what they would do with their precious hours. And then I would ask their partners, what's tripping you up in your marriage? And it was always the things that made the other person happiest. Well, my husband just became a triathlete after we had kids, and so I never see him. He goes on long runs for like 10 hours, right? Self-care, unicorn space. Well, my wife was just out all night, so obviously she doesn't want to get up with a baby because she's just drunk with her friends. Adult friendships, 40th birthday party. So I believe that this is not about breast implants or like a green Ferrari, right? What is a midlife crisis? It's when we don't have time to enter or to even think about our happiness trio. And that is so important. Those things are about our not only the health of our partnerships, but really our longevity. And so I hand everybody cards. Those are the first cards you deal to each other because I want everybody to have those conversations. I need you to support my unicorn space and my self-care and my friendships, and I would love to support you in yours. And that really leads to new, crazy conversations and patterns that I saw all over the country with different couples.
Yeah, I love how you break down the difference of, what tends to be promoted as self-care or what tends to be promoted as, carving out time for you is actually not in this space that's actually building something that you can sustain for the rest of your life. Whether it's a hobby, whether it's a passion, whether it's starting a business, something that you give yourself permission and no shame for investing in.
The active pursuits.
Yes.
Eudaimonic well-being, unicorn space is all about the active pursuits. So reading a book is different than writing a book in terms of what it fires up in your brain. Eating a pie versus baking a pie, same thing.
It's interesting, when I was prepping for this last night, my daughter, who's 8, was looking over my shoulder and she's like, unicorn space.
Yeah, and kids need it too. Kids need it too. I think one interesting quote from this awesome child psychologist said, the advice she wants to give to new parents or people having kids is, don't make your unicorn space the perfection of your children. Because that's what she sees all over New York, especially this city. 17 chess tournaments, 100, crazy lessons. You're going to get into Harvard because I didn't. Take a step back and say, if that's happening to you, it's probably because you don't have your own unicorn space. And it's really important to take that boundary and find out what makes you uniquely you and how do you share that with the world.
I'm glad you brought up the plastic bag thing because my mom did that too.
Oh, yeah.
We reused all the plastic bags from grocery shopping.
Yes.
But I was gonna say, you're mentioning kind of like your mom and kind of where you found some of your inspiration to write the book and everything. I was thinking about my own marriage and just kind of how my husband and I are trying not to repeat patterns. And so his dad, his first divorce was because of he didn't really do anything in the house.
Wow.
And the second divorce was because of that too.
Again with the pattern.
Yes, pattern.
I mean, he's a very nice man, but there's a lot he could probably learn from the book. And so for me, just my mom is someone who, and I think a lot of women of color, Black women that I saw growing up, their job they got paid for was taking care of other people, right?
Correct.
I see it all over New York. A lot of women who are privileged like us, a lot of the free time we have or time we have to work is because potentially another woman of color is probably stepping in to take care of different duties. And at the same time, so my mom was a nurse at a nursing home, so lifted older people all day, all of that, and came home and did the same thing. When you talked about doctor's appointments, I don't remember my dad ever calling a doctor or a dentist or taking us. And so I guess my question is how much interrogation of those past patterns do we have to do, or maybe potentially men have to do, and women have to do to try to kind of uncover maybe repetition of patterns? Because my mom was just over last weekend and she actually told me I should be doing more stuff in the home, and I was like, Mom, I'm already paying for everything. So it's true. My husband's working right now.
Oh my God, that's so good.
But yeah, that's my question is we're not all like, you know, kind of in a vacuum. Like there are different things informing it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think it's the most beautiful question. Women of color were suffering from invisible work at an amazing rate. They're what I call them a lot. Women of color in my book are called new superwomen, women who are holding more than 60 cards and still working full time. So the way that I've been seeing patterns changing is by women, and I talk about this in the Unicorn Space chapter of the book, women grabbing some spiritual friends. And what I mean by spiritual friends is I had a rabbi, I interviewed a lot of different clergy, and this happened to come from a rabbi who said, spiritual friends are really important because they wake you up when you go to sleep. So I've been saying to some of my spiritual friends who knew about fair play early, when other people guilt and shame me for being on the road, when other people say, I'm choosing my book over my children, you need to be my layer. Mm-hmm. Understand that I don't want to repeat those patterns. Seth is doing really great in our new system. Enforce how wonderful this is for both of us. And so on an individual level, it was surrounding myself with spiritual friendships. Mm-hmm. That may not be your mom right now, right?
I love her.
And no, I was going to say maybe not for this, but but maybe until she reads Fair Play. And then on a more systemic level, it's what I talk about with the glitter. The more we can make the invisible visible, the more I believe we're going to make societal change. I had one single mom say to me, just like my mother, right? There's solution privilege in this book because it requires someone to play with. But I said to, this one single mom said to me when she saw the cards, and the huge, it was sort of fanned out, these cards. And she said to me, what if I had this deck of cards when I was in court negotiating my alimony? Because what had happened to her was that she left her job for 20 years. And the court, this was in California, issued her what is called a Gavron warning, which is a duty to become self-sufficient within 6 months, because they said she was slacking off and that she was asking for too much alimony. And so she said, what if actually the court valued these cards, this invisible work? Maybe not only would I have done better in my alimony, right? But I would have had recognition that what I was doing for 20 years was the most important thing for society, which is raising a good human being. And so that's what I hope. I hope one day, with Google's help, that we can recognize that an hour at the pediatrician's office is just as valuable to society as an hour in the boardroom. And that's how we can make those systemic changes. But you start with spiritual friends who understand that if you're making the money, things have to be fair in the home.
Thank you.
Amen.
So I'm a mom of a 2-year-old, happy marriage, 5 years. So we're very much in the thick of it, early years. So I'm wondering where this conversation is playing out in the medical community, because, we're with our pediatricians, we're with our OBGYNs planning for this baby. We're getting the surveys. Are you postpartum depression? I'm getting them. So how can this be inserted into the conversation earlier? Because I'm at, year 2 with my toddler, and my husband and I are just starting to reach our breaking points, figuring out where we're negotiating. But I wish we were having these conversations. I mean, I knew it was swimming in my head, but we never addressed it. Mm-hmm. So how is the medical community thinking about this? Is that starting to, I'm not seeing it in New York anywhere.
No, nobody's thinking about this. Literally. I mean, you saw, like, The Guardian just had an article saying the only solution is to strike. Right. And the New York Times is saying move to a foreign country, right? So I don't think there has been any practical solutions till now. But what's been happening, which has been amazing, was I was at the Wing on Friday night with Ariana Huffington, and this doula who works with 150 doulas in New York City, she has, I guess, the biggest doula practice in New York, told me that she wants to start implementing fair play as a train-the-trainer, which is really, really amazing. I have a friend who told me she introduced it to her OBGYN because she said, fuck folic acid, what you really need is fair play, right? And so it's starting to trickle in. We're gonna just we're planning a big, Hello Sunshine's helping me, which has been so wonderful on the promotion side of getting this into the hands of train the trainers, getting this into the hands of corporations. Corporations have been very receptive to these messages, but I agree with you. And on an individual level, I would just say that last night, this woman I was in Madison, Connecticut, and she said she was leaving to go visit her daughter at the hospital. She just had a baby, and she has 3 other sisters. And she said, well, my husband doesn't know how to wrap the gift, so it may be too late for me, so I'm going home to get tissue paper. But I'm also buying 4 books for my daughter who's at the hospital and her 3 sisters. Yeah. And I said to her, well, it's really not that late for you either. Yeah. And so that's what you hope. We can play it forward by just helping me, everybody in this room, men and women, help me be champions of these messages. We don't have to live like this with figure it out and on the fly, and where 43% of women take a career detour after kids, and where women lose 5%, actually it's even, I found out it's worse, 5 to 10% of their wages for every child they have. It doesn't have to be that way, because men are our allies. I promise you we're gonna get glitter on their hands, and then things are gonna become more fair.
I can't think of a better way to wrap this up. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Eve, so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.